Is Mark Grayson a fraud? We're here to answer that today because this has been a topic of discussion in a lot of circles I'm a part of. And since Invincible is releasing episodes for season 4, I figured it'd be interesting to go ahead and bring it to the channel. Now, I will say Mark does get beat up a lot. Personally though, I find it entertaining because if you watch Invincible, you know that the brutality is one of the things that makes it unique. Now, with Mark being a Viltrumite, he does get stronger after each fight and when he trains. But we're gonna go ahead and break down some of his major fights to determine whether he's a fraud or if he's legit as a fighter and as a superhero. So let's quickly touch on his abilities. If you don't know, I think it'll add some context. As we know, he's half human, half Viltrumite. However, Nolan states that Viltrumite DNA is so strong and so pure that he will eventually pretty much be a full-bred Viltrumite. That allows him to have super strength, flight, super speed, enhanced durability, as well as superhuman endurance. One thing that's unique to Viltrumites though is something called smart atoms. They have unconscious access to and control over these. This is according to the official handbook for Invincible based on the comic. This allows them to adapt, whether that's to harsh environments, to various forms of damage. It's what allows them to fly. It even allows them to hold their breath by essentially making oxygen molecules more efficient. That's why you see Omni-Man claim that he could hold his breath for weeks at a time while flying in space. Now for Mark, that means after each fight, he's gonna get stronger because he's pushing his body to the limit. And when it comes to repair and growth, those smart atoms speed up that process. Now, why are people calling him a fraud? Because he does lose and take damage to a lot of strong characters, even in the fights that he wins. We're gonna go ahead and look at these major fights to see if there's any context or to determine if he's actually a fraud. And the fights that we're gonna focus on are either ones that he lost decisively or they were close in some capacity and he took a lot of damage. So looking at season 1, the first serious fight he had was against the Reanimen on the college campus. I claim that to be a draw because they were pretty much going back and forth and the Reanimen did take itself out once it saw its own reflection. So Mark didn't really win that. He didn't really lose that. He was still fighting. He did fight 3 Reanimen at the same time and I would say he was losing. I'd go ahead and count that as a loss, but the plot pretty much saved him because one of the Reanimen, which I believe his name was Rick, realized who he was and he jumped in and helped Mark. But I'll say that's a loss. Next major fight, Battle Beast. This was 100% a loss, and granted, he was also taking a little bit of damage and fighting against some of Machine Head's goons, but they weren't really doing too much, and when Mark locked in and got angry, he was able to deal with them pretty easily. Most of the damage he took in that fight, and the reason that he got hurt and lost was because Battle Beast was there. And let's be realistic here, even towards the end of the comics, Battle Beast is a top 3-4 character in the entire verse. You can even make arguments for top 2. That's a whole different discussion, but he's in that upper echelon. Now, last fight of season 1, most memorable fight probably in all of Invincible so far, maybe like one of the top 2 or 3, Omni-Man. Now, clearly he lost. Omni-Man is one of the strongest Viltrumites in general. He's easily the strongest superhero on Earth. That's his father. Mark is nowhere near comparable to Omni-Man in power. He hasn't had his powers for long enough. Skill and combat experience that you get through real combat, which Mark has had very little of. Now for season 2, the Viltrumites on Thraxa. This is sort of an for me because they were all capable of damaging Omni-Man, by the way, so these are seasoned Viltrumites. He was getting his butt whooped the entire time. His dad gave him a single piece of advice and then all of a sudden he locked in and he started whooping Thula, and Thula is the Viltrumite with the long braided hair that has the blade at the end. He had her absolutely beat and outclassed. However, he hesitated when it came to dealing the final blow. She took advantage of it and stabbed him. You could say that was a draw because everybody was pretty much left for dead at that point. I would say he got that win against her 1v1, but that's sort of an You guys can decide that. Anissa, just completely outclassed. Anissa is somewhat relative to Omni-Man, and even Cecil and Donald were questioning how comparable she was. Donald said, based off of what he saw, that she was quicker than Omni-Man. And we know how fast Omni-Man is. He's able to fly to planets and other galaxies by holding his breath weeks at a time. Regardless of how comparable she is to Omni-Man, another seasoned Viltrumite, one of the strongest Viltrumites. I don't think I can name 10 single Viltrumites that I would put over her off the top of my head. Last major fight of season 2, Angstrom Levy. Now he won that, and he was going up against a pretty broken Hacks ability. Angstrom Levy's not super strong. He still came out on top, and this is while having to be weary of baby Oliver and his mom who were hostages. So could he really fight all out? Who knows? But he did come out on top with that. All right, season 3. First major fight, Cecil. Now, this was a clear loss, and obviously this is because Cecil had studied and determined a weakness, the only weakness that he could determine for a Viltrumite, which was the sonic frequency that he planted in Mark's ear, and he was just spamming that and jumping him with multiple reanimen, which Mark was taking out a bunch of them at that point. His power had obviously improved, he trained, yada yada yada. They were claiming that Cecil was going to kill Mark if he kept spamming it. That's just prep time and a better strategy. Powerplex, a little bit out of order here. He won, clearly, and this was pretty decisive. The reason I threw this in there is because Mark did tank a lot of damage just so Powerplex could run out of energy. I thought that was pretty notable, and that was a good display of his durability. So he was fighting Mr. Liu, who's the old man, the leader of the order that can turn into the spirit dragon. I count this as a draw. He did have a little bit of help from Eve throughout the fight. However, she was mostly playing cleanup with the prison. He technically dealt a killing blow physically. However, it couldn't put him down because this dragon is made of magical properties, and he said it himself. Those types of attacks won't work because I'm not from this world. He was about to attack Mark again. However, he phased out because of things that were happening around his real body. I count that as a draw. We don't really know how that would have gone. You could say Mark would have lost. Who knows? I say it's a draw. He definitely didn't win. Invincible War. In terms of the fights that he participated in the Invincible War, he for sure won. He was fighting one variant of himself who admitted that he would have lost to our Mark, but our Mark was focused on saving people. Another one showed up, and then him and Eve 2v2'd it, and he was showing superiority clearly. The only time he really got hit when he was worried about protecting Eve, or Eve was falling behind in the fight. That's the only time he really got hit. He was clearly superior. I give him that win. Last fight, season 3. Conquest. I'll say this is a draw. He was basically getting whooped the entire fight. He landed some pretty decent hits here and there. However, it took Eve getting killed for him to get a sort of rage boost to make him relative to Conquest. She eventually had her mental block lifted for a second. She was able to blast his skin off. That was the most amount of damage he took up until that point in the fight. So you could argue that she did bail him out. After that point, Conquest was still standing, and he was ready to keep fighting and try to take Eve out. However, Mark was able to finish him with all of those headbutts and just cave his head in. If you want to say this is a loss, I'm okay with that. I understand. I'd say it's a draw, just because when he got angry enough, he was able to go toe-to-toe with him, and eventually he was in a position to finish him off. But I would not say this is a win. I'd say this is a draw at best. Some of his decisive wins. Season 1, he beat Titan right after he got his power. Kill Cannon right after he got his superhero costume. The Elephant is just a practice dummy. Multi-Paul, Season 3. Future Immortal, Season 3. Mauler Twins in Season 3. Now, even though he didn't finish that fight, Oliver was the one to do that. He was clearly superior. It wasn't even close. The only time he was really getting hit was when Oliver was there distracting him, and then he had to leave the fight to go stop that missile. Overall, I do think there's a lot of context. For example, in Season 1, he had just got his powers, and he was still getting used to them. And Viltrumites, they get stronger over time as they train their bodies, improve their skills, and develop their battle IQ through legit experience. And he's had pretty much just non-stop fights and hasn't been able to focus on just training and developing his skill. Also, he lost to Battle Beast and Omni-Man, who are both top 10 in the verse, even at the end of comics, you could argue. Season 2, way better performances. He pretty much bested a seasoned Viltrumite in combat after a single piece of advice from his dad. He did lose to Anissa as well, but she's pretty much relative to Omni-Man, so there's that. And he had his powers for what, a year or less? Now, Season 3, his only true definitive loss, in my opinion, was Cecil, who was just spamming the only Viltrumite weakness he had discovered and implanted in Mark's head. Otherwise, he was either winning or drawing most of his fights. Unless you say the Conquest fight was just a loss, I understand. Final verdict, Mark's not a fraud. Now, each season, Mark, he's improved his skill, he's gotten stronger, faster, and even smarter. He's even gotten a little bit more ruthless in channeling that inner Viltrumite. I think any loss or major amount of damage that he's taken is reasonable for whatever stage that he was at. And we see that when he has time to actually train, he gets a lot stronger. On top of that, he's pretty much winging it because he doesn't have anyone teaching him or training him. No one really can, because at the times of Season 2 and beyond, he's the strongest superhero on Earth. I don't think it's really black or white where a character should just always win or always lose, or one result makes them a fraud or not, because there's consequences to consider: strategy, prep time, bad matchups with powers, etc., etc. All in all, in my opinion, Mark's not a fraud. What do you guys think? I'd love to hear your opinion on this. Is Mark a fraud? Is he legit? Let me know down in the comments. Also, let me know what topics you're interested in. I love to have these discussions on video. Also, at the time of recording this, I'm about 19 subs away from 200, so if you enjoy the content and want to see more, feel free to hit that subscribe button. Almost at 200. Drop a like if you enjoyed. Otherwise, I'll see y'all for the next discussion.